I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7 p.m. and I'll have the coordinator call the roll. What's that? Oh, okay. You're right.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Dr. Harner?
Here.
Mr. Connor? Mrs. Powers? With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Flexibility is good. We will now take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Don't believe we have any media students here tonight. And our recognition tonight has been pulled, so we'll move right on to our petitions and communication portion of our meeting. When we invite the public to make comments, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates presented mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it's appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. 2 names will be called at one time, the one whose turn it is to speak and the person who will be speaking next. Please both come to the front. We have the clock on the wall to help you with your 2 minutes. So we have 3 speakers tonight. We thank you for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. Elsie Wilson will be first, to be followed by Maxwell Wang. And Elsie, if you would turn the button on for us till it lights up. There you go, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I have this to say. Young people would do what they need to do if they know we are in a relationship with them and care about what they think is important. One critical way we can work as adults toward saving our young people is to get engaged with them. And that includes making it clear what is acceptable behavior and what is not, and why. And asking them whether they value in what we are providing them. Contributing to problems of black youth is a negative narrative developed over decades. Many people believe that there are more young black men in prison than are in college, for example, and it is not true. But such statistics are stuck in the national consciousness. Young people will want discipline, they want knowledge, and they want to know that we care. We create change and sustain it by getting engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Maxwell Wang to be followed by Allison Wang.
Oh, so red light means it's on. Okay, got it.
Yep.
All right. Hello, my name is Maxwell Wang, and I am a former Auburn student. And tonight, I'd like to bring up a few concerns about how the school district is negatively harming our community. Last week, the New York Times ran a very interesting article regarding social mobility across the entirety of the United States. And I quote exactly from them: Winnebago County is among the worst counties in the U.S. in helping poor children up the income ladder. 20 years of childhood in Rockford takes away from a child's average income as a young adult by nearly $3,000 compared to surrounding counties. Now, I would like to ask you guys a very quick question, and that is, what is the single most important contributor towards income mobility? I hope that you guys all realize this answer because this pertains very closely to your jobs, because that answer is education. time and time again has shown that education is what allows families to break the cycle of poverty. Yet, in this school district, we prioritize construction and awarding contracts while cutting essential support structures for the students. Yes, we have a brand new lovely field house at Auburn that looks absolutely amazing to look at, but $13.6 million later, and now we're laying off even more tutors and counselors at Auburn from a staff that is already overworked. Do you guys seriously believe that a single counselor is going to be able to keep track of a couple hundred students and make sure that these guys are able to graduate, refer them to additional support when they need it? Because that's absolutely ridiculous. Unfortunately, these decisions are ones that have already been made, and then I'm sure that in 4 years, they will come to haunt us in our graduation records, and in 10 years, they'll come to harm our economy even more. But we still have a chance to set the right tone for next year. Next year when you're creating your guys' budget, will money go to your contractors, some of which are actually even owned by your family members, I like to add, or are you guys going to put money towards improving the education of low-income families of Rockford? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. Allison Wang.
Good evening, everyone. As I like to repeat, Winnebago County is among the worst counties in the U.S. in helping poor children up the income ladder. This makes us among the bottom 10% of all counties in the U.S. According to economics at Harvard, who were published in the New York Times just last week, here are the estimates of how much less a child in Winnebago County would make compared with an average county. Poor children make about $2,310 less than the national average. The average income kids, they make about $1,660 less than the average. The rich kids, they make about $840 less. And those in the very top 1%, about $60 less than the average. So this means that basically every single group in Rockford gets to have money taken away from their future. Do you think that this is truly fair for the children? Would you not worry about your kids' financial future since they would make less than the others? Also, may I add that kids in neighboring counties such as Ogle County make $2,330 more than the national average, and this is about $4,600 more than Rockford kids. Across the entire country, research found 3 main factors associated with a strong upward mobility: less segregation by income and race, 2, lower levels of income inequality, and 3, better schools. So what this district needs to do is to work on these 3 factors. Less segregation by income and better schools are not going to magically happen overnight, but should be what we're all aiming towards. So please, I would beg of you, make an effort to make our collective goal instead of focusing on personal gain. Otherwise, Rockford students will continue being the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. Are there any board member comments at this time? None? Okay. Then we move on to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following consent items: meeting minutes of April 28th and April 25th, 2015, purchase orders, payroll, accounts payable, contracts under 10,000, and travel. And the following bid recommendations: IFB 15-39, which is the gym floor replacement and gym bleachers at Risa Middle School. IFB 15-41, the sound and light upgrades at East Guilford and Jefferson High Schools. And IFB 15-44, the lawn care application services. The recurring contracts of Smart Learning Systems LLC, architectural services for additions and renovations to 19 schools. And the other consent items, including the resolution and notice of public hearing on the tentative budget for 2015-16, the resolution reauthorizing participation in the liquid asset fund, I believe that's correct, Illinois School District Asset Liquid Fund, and the Freedom of Information Law. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins.
Second.
Second by Dr. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Ms. Jackson.
7E,
7E.
8, 9.
8, all of 8 and all of 9? Okay. Any others? Okay, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the items not pulled, the consent items not pulled.
Ms. Jackson? Yes. Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 absent.
Okay, and I'll take a motion in a second to approve item 7E, which is the contracts under 10,000.
So moved.
Mr. Rollins?
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner. Discussion or questions on contracts under 10,000? Not? I'll have coordinator call the roll on the approval of item 7E.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absent.
Ms. Jackson, would you like items 8 separately or together? Together, okay. I'll now take a motion for the approval of the bids for the 3 items listed under 8 for bid recommendations.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll then on the approval of the bid recommendations.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? No. Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absent.
And we'll do 9 together, so I'll take a motion in a second then for the recurring contracts under 9A and B. Can I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Any discussion or questions? Ms. Jackson?
I do have a question. Have we been provided data on the smart learning system, or should we be? Can't remember. Maybe it was provided in a board update or something. Because this has to do with the school improvement process, right? Is that what this is?
Just receive the final report for cohorts 1 and 2, and Dr. Jarrett can add that to the superintendent's update for next week.
Any idea of what it might say? I mean, what is the data showing, I guess?
It showed as we developed the smart measurement system with stakeholders, including administrators as well as teachers, there were several areas that we looked at with implementation, about 10 core areas. So it shows the self-assessment from all of the buildings, as well as from each individual schools and from a district perspective. It has qualitative and quantitative information, so there are actual comments from all of the participants in cohort 1 and cohort 2.
Okay, and is there money associated with this approval tonight? Are we being asked to approve a dollar amount?
Yes.
How much is it?
321.
274,300.
I hear up here 321.
Oh,
so
that's what
is-
I'm.
Okay, and then next page. And with the 46,890 together. You're correct.
Is that an increase from the last time we approved?
No, that is a decrease.
It's a decrease?
Mhm.
Is this a one-year contract?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Not, then I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the recurring contracts.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absent.
Okay, we are now at the closed session consent agenda items, including the recommendation for salary adjustment, the notice of dismissal and non-renewal of 12 educational support personnel, reduction in force, the notice of dismissal of 9-month educational support personnel, reduction in force, the resolution affirming the hearing officer's finding of fact and recommendation, and the HR organizational report and professional development report, and the student discipline in which expelled or suspended students are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. The following student, EME 18, is expelled for the remainder of this school year and the entire school year next year, the 15-16 school year. The following students, KSB 2, AWE 4, NLA 8, and KAD 22, are expelled for the remainder of this school year and the first semester of next school year. The expulsion for the following student, TRM 9, is held in abeyance contingent upon a conditional probationary agreement for the remainder of this school year and the first semester of next school year being executed on or before the next board meeting. The expulsion for the following student, VFJ 10, is held in abeyance contingent upon a conditional probationary agreement for the remainder of this school year and the first trimester of next year being executed on or before the next board meeting. And the following students have been granted a conditional probationary agreement: JJF 5, JRM 6, MZB 7, KNE 12, ANF 13, EGF 14, DEM 15, AAG 19, QLW 20, JLB 21, EW 23, SDW 24, and DAM 26. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Harner.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rollins. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Ms. Jackson,
11, 12.
11 and 12, okay. Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the consent items, closed session consent items not pulled, which would be all of 13.
Dr. Herner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses and 1 absent.
I'll take a motion to approve the closed session consent items listed under number 11A through E.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Harner. Second by Mr.
Second.
Rollins. Have the coordinator call the roll then on the approval of items 11A through 11E.
Mrs. Powers?
No.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Herner?
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 absent.
And I'll take a motion and a second for the items 12, which were the student discipline.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. No discussion of the coordinator call the roll on the approval of items listed under number 12.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Herner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
No.
Ms. Jackson?
No.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 absent.
Okay, thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett, you have 3 items listed.
I do. First, some brief introductory remarks, and then I'm going to ask Gloria Lundeen from the Community Foundation to come up to talk a little bit about Bandwagon 2 and the progress we're making in support of the district in promoting instruments for students, and also Dr. Howie Kraus to come up and present on behalf of PMA regarding our 5-year financial presentation. To start with, though, I would like to highlight Academic All-Stars are coming up on the 21st of May. The superintendent Student Advisory Group Council is going to have a talent show at East High School on the 15th. And graduations are coming up, and I also wanted to give a specific congratulations to the students in the Montessori program. They were able to raise over $10,000. I wanted to thank Dr. Harner and Mr. Rollins for attending and supporting that event as well. It was really exciting to see what the students accomplished. They raised over $10,000 and are really helping some students in Kenya with their work. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ms. Lundeen and to talk a little bit about Bandwagon 2.
Can you hit the mic button for us? There
Very
you
good,
got it.
thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Okay.
I'm pleased to be here, and I'm learning how to press the button here.
Okay.
But thank you for letting me speak to you, and you may be surprised by the end of this speech. But first of all, want you to know that you have, and the community and the partnership has been very supportive of each other. And I have been very busy these last 2 years in writing thank you notes. And specifically, Dr. Harner, I think you've received a couple from me. Thank you. The Bandwagon 2 initiative and challenges is every bit as exciting as Bandwagon 1 was. And Bandwagon 1 was where we raised $145,000, we, the community, for the music programs or the instruments, uniforms, and sheet music for the high school marching bands. That was way back in 1998 and up to 2000. In addition, that event attracted a $100,000 endowment from an anonymous donor. So you know that there are people in this community that continually care about education. Bandwagon 2 is a little different in that we work together to form a partnership, a strong partnership between the Rockford Public Schools and the Community Foundation. And it is for our middle school band programs. I know that when we were making the case in the first place, we all recognized that education was complemented by the opportunity for music in the schools. As you remember, the goal was $300,000. $100,000 committed by the Community Foundation, $100,000 committed by the Rockford Public Schools, and $100,000 that would be committed by our community. Well, we have a few months to go. October is the end date. Right now, we are at $277,000, which is quite remarkable and wonderful, and again, it shows that people care about our kids. To get to that number, over the past 2 years, the hat has been passed at sporting events, the Rockford Symphony programs, the All-City Musical, a special event at the Rockford Brewing Company was held in March by the foundation, complete with silent auction items, and I might mention that I personally put a Green Bay Packer package together for it with tickets. The Rockford Register-Star also has been very, very, very supportive in keeping the community aware of our efforts. Now, this is all good news, but we have some more work to do. And we have a lot of work to do so that we can be successful and reach our goal of $300,000. Since the start of this effort in October of 2013, 100% of the Community Foundation's 20-member board has given dollars directly to the Bandwagon 2 endowment. Now, it would be, now I would like to ask you, the administration, and the board to join us in a new challenge. Last Thursday, our chairman of our Community Foundation board asked each of our board members to contribute to the Bandwagon at least $100. This is in addition to what they've already given, and I will say that all of them have given 100% of our board has given at least once to the Bandwagon over the last 2 years. Today, in only 5 days, we have heard from all of our board members at the foundation, and they have committed $2,250. Now, we are challenging you, the administration and the board of District 205, to match those dollars that have been committed by the foundation. If you do, we will have another $4,500, and that will mean we will only have $18,500 to go in 4 months. I think we can do this. I hope that all of you here, and perhaps those that aren't here, will join the challenge. And the foundation would like to give you till May 29th, and just before the school ends, so you have plenty of time to get the message out. I'm asking that all of you jump on the bandwagon and make this a good experience for all of our youth in the middle schools. So now I have a little pledge card for all of you. Give liberally and often, and we will look forward to hearing your response. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you very much, Gloria, and we appreciate your support and the Community Foundation's support of our students. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Howie Kraus from PMA. And what we're going to be doing is some 5-year financial projections where we'll have some assumptions baked in, and Dr. Kraus can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you. We presented this to the Operations Committee last week with some adjustments. I'd like to talk about where our financial projections based on a set of assumptions would lead the district. But I would like to first caution, when we look at numbers, it tends to be that we look immediately to the 5-year end of those projections. For us, we believe that the projections for 16, the basis for the preliminary budget to be put on display soon with a balanced budget, is our starting point. We've updated the FY15 budget with projected actuals. We look at 17, and it's rather close, except for those items that you have no control over that are largely coming from Springfield. When we get to 18, 19, and 20, it's more of a trend. That if you have a surplus budget, it tends to accelerate slowly. If you have a deficit budget, it tends to accelerate quickly. So rather than looking at the projections for FY20 in any of our scenarios as being an absolute, it's more of where does the path take us unless we specifically make changes so that that path does or does not occur. We're looking at the operating funds, education, O&M, transportation, IMRF, Social Security, working cash and tort funds. We are not looking at the capital projects fund, nor debt service, nor life safety, where those funds are specifically segregated from use for normal day-to-day operations. As I mentioned, we're looking at the FY16 budget preliminary as the basis for the projections. There have been actions taken at the legislative level and at the state board level, which would have reduced the general state aid for FY15 by about 2.25%, but then given that money back to you, it looks like that money will be, the give back, the hold harmless, will be received by June 30th if it has not already been received. And we're concerned potentially about the fourth categorical payment for the year being delayed until after June 30th. But both that hold harmless and the categoricals with your accrual method of accounting would come back to the FY15 actuals. And then we're going to show you some alternate scenarios to a base model that include some potential changes for general state aid funding, the latest information we have from ISB about potential changes to that this Thursday, the Senate Bill 1 legislation, the cost shift and how that might be implemented to a district like yours. Revenue assumptions are the critical ones. They are the ones that are largely unknown and not necessarily controlled by the district. We know that equalized assessed valuation in the district dropped by about 6.27%. That sounds bad, but that is significantly less than it has been in the last few years. And so we're expecting it to only decrease by about 3% next year, be flat in levy year 16, and then increase at 1% per year after that. We assume $7.5 million of new property each year, which would generate about an additional $550,000 each year into the operating taxes collected from that new property. In keeping with promise to the community, we are assuming a levy that uses a 0% consumer price index, CPI, as you've done the last 2 years and for this current levy year 14 all the way through levy year 17, and then using a 2% consumer price index after that under the tax cap. The most revenues, after we've adjusted them for the anticipated revenues for fiscal year 16, are held flat. You'll see some change primarily in the state and federal dollars. General state aid in our base model is assumed at the current 89%. I would tell you that Senate Bill 1, we'll talk a little bit there, has a very complicated formula to try to determine based on a variety of factors how money should be distributed. That takes legislative effort as contained in Senate Bill 1 and looks like it's sort of stonewalled or at least on the back burner for right now. However, in the last week, the state board has promulgated the idea that they can change the way the money is distributed within the current formula without that legislative change. And on Thursday, it appears that the state board will at least consider, if not act, on changing the way the money is distributed, not to prorate it, where everyone receives 89% of their entitlement, but rather to look at a per student reduction or a percentage of operating expenditures or operating revenues per pupil, which would in either case, result in additional money to Rockford. The amount to be determined. We have a couple of preliminary numbers floating out there, but in either case, there would be more money to Rockford 205. Whether Senate Bill 1 ever comes to fruition or not may be blunted, if you will, because of this potential action by the State Board on Thursday. Revenues by source, 41% from property taxes, 28% from general state aid. The remainder coming in small pieces. The 11.1 from the other state are categorical payments and grants. The federal dollars, largely the same amount, also for grants for support, primarily special education, low-income students, and free or reduced lunch. When we look at the aggregate revenue analysis looking from 2016 out to 2020, we can foresee, based on, again, on that 89% general state aid, that your revenues would go up about $11 million over that time period from $350 to about $361 million. That's a critical factor because the ones that will change in all likelihood will be that general state aid and state money. On the expenditure side, you know that you're in negotiations because your contract expires at the end of FY15. The FY16 staffing reductions that have been approved are included, and staffing is held at those levels, the FY16 levels for 17 through 20. Health insurance costs are assumed to increase to the district at 4% annually. And then we've made adjustments for our FY16 and held most expenditures at those levels, though there are some increases built in for textbooks, technology, transportation. The Ed Fund Other Objects, tuition and charter payments, is the one line item or group of line items that increases significantly annually. That's for your students who are tuitioned out of the district, payments to your charter school. So containment of those costs that you can control may have some impact, but those are projected to increase 10% annually. The expenditures, no surprise to anybody, salaries and benefits make up the majority of it. About 75% of all of your expenditures are in salary and benefits. So when we look at the operating expenses, you'll note when we bring both revenues and expenditures together that the current projected budget for FY16 shows a balanced budget. And you see that the expenditures increase significantly faster than the revenues have done in our projections based on that set of assumptions we just outlined. So in that middle, you see that the potential surplus deficit for this year looks like it is smaller than what you anticipated when the budget was adopted, a balanced budget for FY16, and then we find the expenditures increasing faster than revenues as it sets. The importance there, and what I saw when I met with Cabinet, was the intent to how to control those expenditures over time in a way so that those dollars would not, that ending projection was not what would occur. In this case, we're looking at red line is the aggregate fund balance on June 30th from your audits and projected forward for your operating funds. The blue line is an estimate of where your fund balances would be prior to distribution of taxes in June. The vertical lines are by fund, the fund balance. So if you added up the amounts that were represented by all of the yellow vertical bars, it would add up to the amount shown as the projected fund balance for 2015. Alternate scenarios. Whether it's Senate Bill 1, whether it's the governor's intent to put more money into general state aid as he announced in his budget message to fund general state aid at 95% proration, whether it's a different funding mechanism altogether. We have a scenario that just shows general state aid funded at 95% next year and then 100%. We have one that includes the educational fund capital outlay for technology and furniture beginning in FY17 and bringing those two together. We have modeled the latest impact of Senate Bill 1, which over a phase-in of 4 years would bring in an additional $5.4 million, $5.6 million to the district. And then on the other side of the equation, with the pension reform decision rendered by the Supreme Court on Friday, the cost shift, in this is an opinion, has moved from possible to somewhere between likely and definitely going to happen. The cost shift is the idea that the state, because it can, will shift some of the burden for the teachers' retirement system from its side of the ledger to the local school district side of the ledger. And the most aggressive shift that has been discussed, and hopefully the worst case scenario, is about 2.5% each year of the monies that you pay in certified salaries would now have to be paid by the district to TRS instead of paid to TRS or not paid to TRS by the state. So that over a period of time, over 3 years, the district's obligation would increase from about 0.6% to about 8.1% of all of those dollars. And recognizing that each percent is about $1.5 million. So that the impact of that potential cost shift, if it's implemented in that aggressive a manner, would be extremely big. And then we have full funding of general state aid, but with that cost shift, the full funding that we outlined in the first scenario. So here's the full funding of general state aid. If that does not illustrate the importance of the state funding education to Rockford 205, I don't know what does. Even with the Ed Fund capital outlay that's desired, that still provides a pretty solid picture so that if that were fully funded with general state aid, you'd certainly have some room for that flexibility. The phase-in of Senate Bill 1 implementation is not quite as good as the full funding, of course, but still is better than the base model. The cost shift, again, this is the one that scares most of us the most, and this is the most aggressive plan we've heard, and the most aggressive rumor we've heard of that 2.5% per year. That assumes that there is no taxing authority given to local school districts within the tax cap to recapture any of that cost. So it would have to be absorbed by the existing revenues. And then the last one, if we did have the full funding and still had the cost shift, again, not quite so bad in the short term, but the longer term projections start to look, the hill goes downhill very quickly. With that, I would entertain any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Mr. Rollins.
One scenario that you haven't mentioned, the media at least has reported that Governor Rauner has suggested coupling some of this with property tax relief. Have you looked at any of that? Did you consider that not to be probable, or?
There's legislation's been introduced here in the last couple of days. There are, we know of 4 pieces of legislation that the School Management Alliance, including the School Board Association, highlighted today in some of the analyses that do look at property freezes at the FY15 level. Chapman and Cutler has reviewed the language that's currently in those amendments and has more questions than answers about the intent, because they seem to be relatively poorly written. If you thought about what you have done the last couple of years with basically a 0% CPI, it would be extending that out as far into the future as we could see. And whether there would be any additional money coming from new property or not is one of those things that's not very clear in some of the legislation.
Okay, so it's just too indefinite at this point to even do any modeling, I take it?
Yes. I guess that's the short answer.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Ms. McCullough, the Education Committee report?
Education Committee has not met since the last board meeting. We'll be reconstituting the committee in the next month and sending out some notices about how people can apply for membership, to be interviewed, and that ends my report.
Mr. Rollins, Operations Committee?
The Operations Committee did meet here in this room last Tuesday. We had really 4 things that we talked about, one of which we just heard the report. We had that same report from PMA. The second thing we talked about was the community eligibility provision. Mr. Schmidt, I think, is going to give a report on that later under new business, so I'm not going to repeat what he's going to tell you. Other than to say that after a lot of discussion, our committee did recommend that on a divided vote for the board to consider. We got an update on new buses. It wasn't really in connection with any proposed action or any recommendation. I think it was more of informational. I will say, I mean, one of the things that we talked about, because there had been a request for information about the impact of not buying new buses on our maintenance costs. And I think one of the things that we did learn and talk about is the fact that we have been buying buses with 10-year warranties, and those 10-year warranties are expiring. And when those 10-year warranties expire, our maintenance costs are going to increase dramatically on those buses. One of the pieces of information that we were given was and I can't remember how many years they went back, our annual average maintenance costs per bus, and they have decreased dramatically over the past 6 or 7 years. And I think if we don't start replacing buses, we're going to start seeing those costs go back up. And then the fourth item was a discussion of contract recommendations on architectural firms. We actually just adopted a proposal from the administration as part of the consent agenda item. I will say that we had a very robust discussion about that as well. We made some recommendations to the administration. My understanding, and I did ask the question before we took the vote, the administration listened to us. They went back and they did what the committee had asked them to do, which was to get the costs a little bit lower and maybe redistribute the work a little bit. So those were all done, and that's been approved by the board. We will be meeting next first Tuesday next month. We will also be sending out recommendations or invitations for people to apply who want to apply.
Dr. Hunter, the Facilities Plan Oversight Committee report.
We have not.
I'm sorry. A question.
When I listened to that, did I hear this correctly, Mr. Schmidt, that the newer buses that were under warranty but didn't have the engines replaced because they didn't fail within the warranty time are the ones you're most concerned about, and those are the ones you'll replace?
Yes, it's not necessarily some of the older ones, it's some of those buses that we bought. Some of the newer buses, where they're about 6, 7, 8 years old, that we're having more issues with the engines. Well, actually, Greg's had more issues with the engines, so that's why we purchased some additional warranties for those buses about 5 years ago. So those are the ones that Greg is looking at, because those are the ones that are more problematic for him. So as he looks at the buses he's trading in, it's not necessarily the older ones, it's the ones that are really the problem. And there was a batch of buses in there that were just problematic because of the engines.
And then my second question about buses, because we had such a robust conversation about this at the last board meeting, is there additional information coming forward? My understanding is that we've lost our window of opportunity now to purchase buses for the new year. We're going to have to, so could you just speak to that?
It'll be purchase buses and have them delivered by the start of school. So we could potentially still have them this calendar year. What we're looking at is bringing to the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, requested some additional information on the maintenance costs, similar to what we did at the operations, so that will be presented tomorrow. And then we'll, based off of some of that, we'll look at some additional recommendations that the Operations Committee wanted us to cost out that we'll be bringing to the next Operations Committee.
But because we're not able to do the replacement in time for the start of school, we'll have to do additional maintenance on the buses that we,
Potentially additional.
on some buses, is that
Yes.
correct? Or
Yes.
is that we may have to do?
We will. If we start a school year, there's certain inspections that we have to go through and just routine maintenance that we do to get those buses ready for the start of school. If ands or buts about it, we will make preparation. We'll do that for the school year.
But we'll still continue to talk about bus purchase before the end of the year. Is there any reason to do that if you've gotten this far? Or
No,
if
we
you're
still
gonna
can
do
get
all
it
this
anytime we can get the We had in our budget 5 buses out there, so we still have that money allocated. So we either still move forward with the 5 buses or whatever recommendation comes out of operations and then ultimately to the board if the board wants to purchase some additional buses out there.
Okay, thanks for the follow-up.
Any other questions on operations committee? Thanks. Okay, Dr. Harner now.
Facilities Committee has not met. It's going to meet on May 19th.
Okay.
At 7 p.m. on the 4th floor in the superintendent's boardroom.
We'll move on then to our action items for tonight's meeting. Our first item is the Teens in Transition. Cyrus, are you presenting this? Or it has been presented? Do I need a motion and a second to approve it? There we go. Is there a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. McCulloch,
Second.
second by Dr. Harr. Are there any questions or discussion? I think Mr. Malone presented this last time, didn't he? Yeah, he did. All right, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the Teens in Transition program.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 absent from the vote and 1 absent.
Our second item is the AT&T telephone service. That was presented by Mr. Schmidt. Is there a motion and a second to approve this service?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins.
Second.
Second by Dr. Harner. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the AT&T telephone service.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 absent from the vote and 1 absent.
Our third action item tonight is the Comcast Internet Service. This was presented by Mr. Schmidt. Is there a motion and second to approve the Comcast Internet Service?
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Harner,
Second.
second by Mr. Rollins. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the Comcast Internet Service Agreement.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 absent from the vote and 1 absent.
Final action item tonight is the Student Code of Conduct for fiscal year 16 that was presented by Mrs. Angela Hyde Carter. Is there a motion and a second to approve the Student Code of Conduct for fiscal year 16?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. McCulloch,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Any questions or discussions? Mr. Rollins.
I think based on the discussion that I had at the last meeting, I am going to make a motion that we add distribution of drugs as a mandatory expulsion recommendation to the Student Code of Conduct. I can only speak for myself. I think that's a type of behavior in our schools that creates an unsafe environment for students. And I think it ought to rise to the level of a mandatory expulsion recommendation.
A motion. And Ms. McCulloch got a second. Any questions or discussion on that? Not that, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on Mr. Rollins' motion to add the distribution of drugs as a zero tolerance offense.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mrs. Powers? Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absent.
So now I need a motion and a second. Okay. Wasn't that? Okay. So we have to call the question on the original motion as amended. So I need a motion first to, no, I already have that, okay. And a second?
Second.
All right, okay. Any questions or discussion on that? All right,
Mrs. Jackson has a question.
and Ms. Jackson?
So this is on the recommendation to have drugs as a mandatory
Distribution.
distribution as a zero tolerance.
This is the whole handbook that's already been voted on. That's in there, now it's the whole handbook. This is on the amended student code of conduct.
So now we can have discussion on the entire book, correct?
Yes.
So out of the discussion at the last board meeting was that we place students in an alternative environment who are charged with a drug offense. Is that still what the board is thinking, or?
To me, the board has not been involved in where a student is placed. If they're expelled, that's up to the discipline team that
There was
determines that.
discussion at the last board meeting
Okay.
that perhaps the desire of the board, so I'm asking, so that's off the table now, correct? That a student will not automatically be assigned to an alternative environment?
Any comments from other board members on that? You want to ask Ms. Carter? Okay. Okay.
Can you just explain, if a student is caught, we're not talking about distribution, we're talking in possession or use of drugs, that and is put on a CPA, is it written in the current code that we're going to vote on tonight, that they automatically be put in an alternative environment?
No, it's not. There's an option there.
Okay, and then I have a question, because I'm looking at an article that talks about the bill, and I believe you spoke to us. What is that bill that is has it passed yet, or is it being considered?
The Senate Bill 100?
Yes, okay. So it takes into account certain things, right, so can you speak to what those points are that we have to take into consideration before we suspend or expel a child? It's changed the code, correct?
Senate Bill 100 is not passed yet. It's still in proposal.
Is Mrs. Height Carter, is this new student code of conduct aligning with that, with the changes that we expect to come, I guess, or no?
Yes, I believe that our code would actually align to Senate Bill 100. It was like that in the past as well, Ms. Jackson, because we do provide social intervention services, and we do make sure that when students are suspended, it is due to a disruption of the learning environment or there is a safety concern, which are the two conditions for suspension that are listed in Senate Bill 100.
Okay, thank you. So the article that I'm reading says a 2012 study found that Illinois suspends more African American students than any other state in the U.S. with the black-white suspension disparity that is the highest in the country. So it's got some points. It says disciplinary removals of longer than 3 days must be limited to instances where the student's presence is an ongoing threat to the school and all other options have been exhausted. A school board must state how a suspension and expulsion is in the best interest of a school before disciplinary action. School districts must establish re-engagement policies for disciplined students. Suspended students must be given the opportunity to make up their work. School officials must limit suspensions and expulsions to the greatest extent practicable. And so I know in this current code, we have it in now where there's a provision where homework, it used to be, you had to request it, now it's mandatory, right?
Yes.
Okay. And we have the re-engagement policies.
Yes, we have a transition process that we listed in the code as well.
So I guess I have a question, and anyone from the administration can feel free to answer it. We revise this code every year, and we do that because, do we have to by statute, or is it just something that we do? Why do we revise the code every year?
Statute provides us to present it to the board to make sure that we are ensuring that our schools are safe, that we are addressing disrupted students in the learning environment.
And no matter how often or how many times we revise this code, there's something that remains constant, and that is the fact that black students, especially black males, have the highest incidence of suspensions, whether in school or out of school, They have the highest rate of expulsion. When we look at our CPAs, they have the highest rate. Even when you look at our alternative programs, they make up the majority of the student body. So why are we seeing that? I mean, why isn't some of that changing when we revise this code?
Well, the code, based on the information that I shared with you last time, if you notice, the incidents in District 205 as a whole are declining. The students that commit the incidents of their infractions basically warrant the actual consequences and the interventions that are provided by the code, regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender.
But you know what? The data shows it, and it's everywhere that you look, that African American students, okay, there's a great disparity that exists. It's just there. So I guess what can we do as a district to try to eradicate some of that? And anyone from the administration can feel free to answer. It doesn't have to be just you.
Well, I will share with you that we do analyze data, and we do try to make sure that we provide the supports in the schools where there is an influx or an increase in specific behaviors, but we do not address or determine whether or not to execute the code based on ethnicity or gender.
Okay, and you know that I'm not asking the administration to do that, merely stating facts that are out there, and that this is what we see, even with our data. This is what we see.
We just comment that in Ms. Hyde-Carter's presentation 2 weeks ago, we see very significant positive trends for students in a number of different categories, and I would just direct that shows positive trends for all students where it's significant low water marks in terms of students. So I think that some of the changes in the discipline code, based on that evidence, seem to be having a very positive effect on the overall climate, and I want to applaud Ms. Hyde-Carter and her team's work for helping that. We certainly need to continue to look for ways to meet the needs of all students, but I think the trend data is positive.
And I'm not taking away from that. It's just the fact remains that no matter what data you look at, even the improvements, African American students, black students, predominantly males, are at the top when it comes to anything adverse. So that's a fact.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, I guess I'll comment. We also have an obligation to keep our schools safe and our students safe, students of all color. And we have, as defined in the Student Code of Conduct, a very narrow set of circumstances under which people can be expelled or disciplined, particularly expelled. And when we get to the point where somebody's being expelled, in my view, and in every expulsion that I've reviewed in the 4 years that I've been on the board, it's because they create a risk to the safety of other students, many of whom are students of color. When students are getting injured in the school, those students are usually students of color. And so when we talk about adverse effects on the people who are being expelled, we also need to talk about the adverse effects on the people who are there to be educated and the people who are not being expelled. And that is equally important, and as sometimes I feel like their voice is not being heard. And that's my comment.
Well,
Ms. Jackson?
and I guess I would say that can be your comment, and I made mine, so.
Thank you. Okay, and seeing no other questions or comments, I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the Student Code of Conduct as amended.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mrs. Powers,
No.
Ms. Jackson,
No.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes with 4 yeses, 2 noes, and 1 absent.
Thank you all. We are now on to the new business portion of our agenda. And our first item is $120,000 grant acceptance for energy efficient improvements. It's not Dr. Wolf.
No, I am filling in for
Okay.
Dr. Wolf tonight, so.
All right. Mr. Schmidt.
What you have, we applied for a grant. Part of our capital projects on our $250 million was lighting retrofits for our buildings. And some of those buildings were individual buildings that had still T12 bulbs out there, very inefficient. So we were looking at retrofitting those light bulb fixtures with LEDs. So we applied for this grant for $120,000 on approximately a $300,000 construction cost, and we won it. So we got the grant. We were approved for this grant. This is work that will be starting over the next year. If you look at it, it's going to save us about $40,000 to $45,000 a year and then the payback's going to be about 4 to 5 years on there because it's going to save us 867,000 kilowatt hours, and we're at about 0.38 cents a kilowatt hour plus some other fees. So it's actually a great thing to have. It increased the payback with this 120,000 by about 3 more years. So we'll recoup our money within 5 years on this project.
Any questions for Mr. Schmidt? Okay. This will be presented at our next board meeting on the 26th for a vote. Community eligibility provision. Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you. Also, Nathan Huff, our chef and culinary trainer and business manager, is going to help me with this one too. Community eligibility. Basically, it's a program that the USD has. It's an alternate way to provide meals to students in the school districts, free meals to students in the district. It takes away the stigma of filling out that free and reduced lunch application. It puts it out there that every student in the district gets a free meal. We get reimbursed at that higher rate. It'll speed up our lines, our serving lines, because now we don't have to identify the children. We just identify it as a reimbursable meal. It looks at the pilot program that they had. There was a pilot study out there. It increased the participation on those pilot schools by 25% for breakfast and about 13% for lunch. These are some of the other things that we looked at. The PR of individuals that have had negative balance accounts, we will not have that anymore because everybody would get a free meal. So basically, nobody would have to pay for a meal in the district. They would still have to pay for the a la carte items that they get on the snack bars and things like that. But everybody will be able to get a free meal in the district based on this program. They began the pilot in 2011. There were 3 states that was looking at the pilot. Since then, they've opened it up to all districts in all 50 states to participate in this program. There's 2,200 school districts that are using the CEP, and 135 of the school districts in Illinois are currently in this program. This is just a little bit more in Illinois. There's 4 of the 445 school districts eligible, not total districts, 135 participating. So there's a lot of events. If you look there, there's some notables with the Chicago, CEP, Aurora, there's Joliet, there's Beloit, close to home, that's in there, plus 2 of our charter schools are actually in this program. Part of it is looking at reimbursed at the federal level. Right now, this is how our free, reduced, and paid lunches are. So our lunch, we're reimbursed at $3 and, that's right there, $3.06 on a free lunch, $2.66 on a reduced, and a paid is 36 cents. So if you look at right now on a reduced lunch at $2.66, they're paying 40 cents of cash, so it's still up there at that reimbursement level. And this is what we have for breakfast for $1.93 down to a paid is 28. But we still get a little bit reimbursed on some of those. If you look at it from year to date at the 3/31, we've served about 2.9 million meals. So our total plate cost right now is $2.92. We're basically almost a 6% profit margin on there. That goes in there, if you look at our reimbursement rate is $3.06, that we're below that with our plate cost of $2.92. So right now our revenues in that department as of that date were $8.7 million. Our expenses were $8.3, so we had a profit of about $353,000 at the end of March. With the CEP, what it looks like to be on that reimbursement rate, it looks at your number of direct certs. Our direct certs are from the state of Illinois, where these individuals are directly certified and they do not fill out a free and reduced application. Reason this was for this year, it jumped up quite a bit in our amount of direct cert based on how the state identified direct certification with some of their changes in the Medicare and things like that. So our direct certifications went up to almost 18,000 students, 17,000 some change. So that was a big increase. So if you take the factor they look at, you take the number of direct certified reduced by the students that are eligible, then you take that number and you multiply it by 1.6. That tells you what percentage of the individuals will receive that higher reimbursement rate from the federal government. So with us doing that, of our direct certified, a little about 18,389, that certification right there is 107%. That means 100% of our kids will be federal reimbursed at the higher federal limit. So if our direct certifications were lower, and this was, say, 96%, that means we could apply for the program, but only 96% of the students would actually get that higher rate, but we'd still offer it to everybody. But since we're over 100%, we qualify basically for all students getting that free meal. This is kind of looking at where we're at right now, just some of the same information that I present earlier, but looking at the pilot studies. The pilot studies, the three states they had in the 2011, it showed an average participation increase of 25% for breakfast and 13% for lunch. So we kind of use that, and looking forward, that would increase our participation, plus it would increase our department profits by about $100,000 based on the actual numbers from year to date at the end of March. We looked at this. I talked with Dr. Wolf about this. This will not affect our Title I funding. We talked with our E-rate consultant. This will not affect our E-rate funding that we receive every year for our telco and some of our priority 2 for our technology expenses. They will not have to fill out a free and reduced lunch application, but there will be an alternative application for the sports fees that may have to be filled out. That will be a lot simpler than the standard free and reduced lunch application. At the end of the day, the CEP will increase our participation based on some of the pilot studies. It'll increase our profit. It'll make our serving lines go a little bit faster. It'll increase that free and reduced stigma for anybody that has it out there. It'll take care of any negative meal balances that we have, that we won't give a child an alternate meal, and provide a lunch for everybody. Any questions?
Ms. Bowers?
So I guess what I'm confused about is on slide 8, where you're showing that the year-to-date puts us in the plus column. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Rollins has been pretty adamant about an explanation as to why we've been losing money for the last 2 years.
Well, we did a shift. We did a presentation at the Operations Committee, actually at the December, I do believe, to show kind of where we're at year to date and some of the actions that we took with increasing participation, increasing revenue sales, and doing a shift of some of the principals' salaries and benefits that were actually in this fund into a different fund. So we did that presentation at the Ops Committee.
And so what is our full year forecast then?
I have not done the full year forecast.
And then what is our current unpaid rate? Is that what it's called? Unpaid meal fees? It's on slide 3. What are our current unpaid meal fees?
Oh, the total fees of individuals out there that have a negative balance. I can get that number and put it out in the weekly report.
And so do we collect on those, or how, I mean?
Yes, we collect on those. That goes out there. We just recently send out some negative balances to seniors right now, and that's some of the fees that they have out there that they will potentially have to pay currently.
Or they don't graduate?
I don't think it's graduated. I think we'll end up sending the individuals responsible for that bill to collections.
You didn't pay your book fees, you didn't graduate. It's the way I was raised. So if you don't pay your fees, you don't graduate. Okay.
Yes, we can definitely find out and make sure. I don't know how the fees are.
Mr. Rollins, you had your light on.
It wasn't really a question, but I did want to emphasize, because I asked the question at the Operations Committee, the reason this works for us right now is because we did have that large increase in the direct certs. So my concern or my question was what happens if that changes? what I was told, and I just want to confirm this, is that if we go forward with this, we're essentially promised this for the next 3 years?
It's a 4-year program.
4 years?
Yes.
Okay. So it won't matter even if our direct certification rate decreases, we'll at least know that we can do it for 4 years without having an issue.
Correct.
That's my
No, it's
understanding.
not 1.6. It's that amount of direct certifications where we have 18,838 or
They
300.
basically
yeah.
impute our rate for the next 4 years. The current rate, they'll lock us in for the next 4 years.
But the current rate is the 1.6.
No, the current rate is 18,000. That 1.6 is a multiplier that the USDA uses as a formula to see how much percentage of your students qualify for the federal
But
reimbursement.
if the current number stays, or if the number stays at 18.3, but our enrollment goes up, our percentage will change. You can't say that it's just going to stay the same.
Right, if that enrollment goes up, if that stayed stagnant and that enrollment went up, this percentage would go down, and that times that, then that percentage would go down. But as long as it's still over 100%, once you're all said and done, you'll still qualify for 100% reimbursement. But the program, like Mr. Rollins says, it's a 4-year program, so.
And you, were you done, Mr. Rollins? And you talked about comparatives in other districts surrounding in the, and you're taking into account the expected increase, I saw one of the slides, in student participation, correct?
Yes, that's where we looked at it. And this is basically if we increased the breakfast participation by 25% and the lunch by 13%.
So what's the downside?
There really is no downside. It's a win-win for everybody. It's a program that the USD offers, and there really is no downside to it. It doesn't affect any of our funding. It gives everybody access to a free meal in there. Based on the reimbursement, it can increase our participation.
And do we have to change the menus at all? Is there a change in what's required, or?
No.
No.
Our menus are already certified by the state once we put them out there to make sure we get an extra 4 cents per reimbursement too by the state.
Thank you.
Ms. Powers?
I did have one more question, and that is, do we still have to do the audit that we do at the beginning of the year then?
There's no verification audit because there will be no applications to audit.
So, Mr. Vosberg's kids get to eat for free?
If
May
they, anybody who attends Rockford Public Schools will be offered a free meal on this.
Still tax dollars, I guess.
Okay, any other questions? If not, this will come for our vote on next board meeting on the 26th. Dr. Weisman will present our next item on the consortium for educational change, continued collaboration facilitation services. Say that 3 times fast.
We have, a handful of months ago, I came to you with an ask for a collaboration contract with the Consortium for Education Change. We've been using them as a partner for a handful of initiatives, including our strategic planning and some joint projects that we are collaboratively trying to pursue in partnership with the REA. 2 of those projects we are looking to continue working on. Many of them we've completed or are in final stages and will be able to complete with the current contract. 2 of them, namely the evaluation facilitation services and our curriculum development within instructional council, the facilitation services for that, we're seeking to extend and continue that relationship with them. And so this contract is an ask to extend services that we have previously been using them for.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Weisman? Okay. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks. This will also come up for a vote on our May 26th meeting, and Ms. Stacy Talbert Scott. I'll get it right. We'll present our final 2 items, the resolution to adopt the budget and permanent operating transfer.
All right, good evening. In terms of those two items, I'm actually going to be presenting those together because they pretty much go together for the fiscal year 16 budget. So for our proposed fiscal 16-year budget for all funds, we are looking at a total, well, I'll start with operating funds. For our operating funds and operating expenditures, we are presenting a balanced budget in the amount of $360,953,000. In terms of our capital, we are presenting a budget that shows revenue of just about $6 million. And the majority of that is actually coming from property taxes for debt service. And the expenditures are $66,392,000 for capital funds. So total, all funds, revenue, $380,516,000 and $427,346,000. So just to do a recap of the assumptions, which many of you have heard several times, and including in Dr. Krause's presentation. Of course, property taxes, what we looked at, what the board approved was just taking no CPI. So that was what is incorporated in the budget, and just accounting for new property. Of course, in terms of our CPPRT, or our corporate personal property replacement tax, there is an adjustment in the 15-16 budget over the fiscal year 15 of about $2 million reduction, and that's pretty much just to recalibrate our fiscal year 16 budget to where we're thinking we're going to land in fiscal year 15 actuals. For both our state and federal funding, for the GSA proration, we still use the 11% proration for 16. We're assuming that we're going to receive all 4 state aid categorical payments. And for state and federal funding, we're expecting it to mirror 15. However, you'll see when you look at fund by fund in terms of Fund 18 comparison of fiscal year 16 to 15, there's actually an increase in both revenue and expenditures, and that's pretty much recording grants that we actually have in the district but that were not included in our budget for last year. Supplies and, salaries and benefits, we are budgeting, according to the contractual increases. For our health care cost, we did the recalibration of that number also. And so in looking at our fiscal year 15 budget amount, we work with Williams Manny on our projections. And what they're showing us is pretty much that our actual is going to come in at about $12,185,000 per employee. And so we actually added on an increase of about 9% to that. So our PEPY is $13,248 per employee. There's also an adjustment for our grant, our federal grant funded employees certified of about $4 million. And that pretty much has to do with our federal TRS rate. Last year, that was actually budgeted at 9%, and in fiscal year 15, it's actually come in at 33%, and we just got notification that that's actually going to increase to 36% in fiscal year 16. For the remaining categories, purchase services, supplies, materials, and capital and equipment, we either looked at remaining flat or decrease if at all possible. There are some items within the contractual agreements in bids and contracts for purchase services and other things that have increases that are built in, so those are factored in. One of the bigger things in supplies and materials that is an increase would be our $1 million elementary school math instructional resource adoption. For our capital and equipment, we continue to invest in technology at $1 million this year and $300,000 for our Fund 10 investment in the capital plan for furniture. We will this year also, for fiscal year 16, what we're going to do, and that has to be done in a separate resolution, but we're wrapping it in with the budget presentation, would be a permanent fund transfer from the Transportation Fund to the Operations and Maintenance Fund of $10 million. And that's primarily, that's something that is acceptable and legal between, in the Illinois School Code. And the Operations and Maintenance Fund has historically not only helped or paid for expenses for the Transportation Fund in terms of building and grounds and utilities, but for all throughout the district. And as a result, has a little bit over a $9 million negative fund balance. And so with this transfer, that will help to bring the Operations and Maintenance Fund up so that we're not continuing to carry a very large deficit in that fund in terms of fund balance. And in terms of our budget direction for fiscal year 16, and I mentioned this early, where feasible, all non-salary and benefit budgets, we were requesting the directors and administration to, if at all, cut their budgets by 10%. Okay, so this is a picture, if you look at all of our operating funds and for our fiscal year 16 budget and all of the different revenue by sources as well as expenditures by object codes. And then at the bottom, you'll see what we're estimating our beginning fund balance to be, and that's based on where we would be ending our fiscal year 15 with the forecasted actuals. As well as what our fund balance would be for fiscal year 16, which we're projecting a balanced budget, so it would be the same dollar amount. As we do comparisons, and once again, we look at our operating funds budget summary, you'll see where we compare to our fiscal year 14 actual, which is the audited actuals, our fiscal year 15, the what I call the original or the board adopted or board approved budget, and then the forecast for fiscal year 15, our forecasted actuals, and this is reiteration of forecast number 4. And so that's where we're showing that in fiscal year 15, we're looking like we will end the year with a $1.7 million deficit. But with the reductions that were made within our budgeting process for fiscal year 16, we will be ending the year with a balanced budget. And in terms of some of the major changes, we can go to the next slide. Some of the major changes, and when we look at our revenue for our operating funds, you'll see that our property taxes, which is the biggest block there, is about 46% of our revenue. So that's about $140,244,000. And that the other piece of that is our CPPRT of $22,699. And as we look at our state revenue, which is the blue block, is about 39% of our total revenue, or $141 million, with general state aid being $103 million, and special ed being $12.9 million, transportation being just under $13 million, and then early childhood being $8.7 million. And I just tried to highlight some of the larger blocks of money that's making up those categories. And then for our federal revenue, $41.8 million, with about $14 million of that being, of course, the title funds. And then as we look at what are other sources and uses and transfers, so one of them would be the interest income transfer from working cash fund that actually goes into the education fund of $100,000, and then O&M. So basically we pool our cash in one fund, and then we're allocating out the interest income to the respective funds. And then, of course, the transfer that was mentioned earlier of the $10 million to the transportation fund from the operations and maintenance, to the operations and maintenance fund from the transportation fund. So I'm just going to look a little bit deeper at our property taxes piece. So as you can see here, all of our total property taxes for our levy year 2014, in which we'll record 50% in our fiscal year 15 budget, and then another 15% in our fiscal year 16 budget. That total is just about $9 million. And so basically what the chart represents, below the blue bars would represent our EAV, so you can see how it peaks at about tax year 2009, and then the decline, as well as the dotted lines would be our tax levy dollars. So you can also see how that also follows in, how that's actually somewhat of a lag behind what the EAV is how that's presented. And as what was mentioned earlier, we have a 6% decline in our EAV. However, one of the things that is interesting this year is that Lowe's Distribution had an enterprise zone that actually expired. So we were able to capture $8.2 million of EAV that acts like new property to our tax rolls. And that actually gave us about 408,000 additional tax dollars. Okay, as we look at our expenditures, you'll see that in terms of our total salaries, that out of the $360 million, which if we take out the $10 million that's the transfer between transportation and O&M, it's $350 million. 50% of that is our salary line at $181 million. What we're projecting this year is 3,666 FTEs. We're also, this includes the reduction of 102.55 FTE reductions, which shows in our budget of a $7.43 million reduction in salaries and benefits. For our benefits line, that is another $78.2 million. And the things that we mentioned earlier, an assumption that has the per person amount of $13,248, and then the federal TRS rate of 36%. And that's another 22% of our budget. For our purchase services, that's just under $40 million, and then you'll see the other categories with supplies, capital, and other. So I just wanted to share with the group in terms of our FTEs and the 3,666 FTEs, how all of those are between the various categories of certified administrators, non-certified teachers, etc. So the last box there is what we're budgeting for FY16, and then there are some previous fiscal year comparables to compare that against. And then the lower chart actually shows between each of the funds how those positions are actually allocated. And then this chart here shows the same information with the 3,666 FTEs, and then if we add the actual dollars of salaries and benefits to that, how those dollars are actually allocated between the various categories, and then the percentage of the pie that each category has. So within the proposed budget and within the transmittal letter, administration worked really hard to prepare a budget to present to you all tonight that would align with the newly adopted strategic plan, which was used as a guide for that. And so here we're just highlighting a few of the things. We've talked about and captured the cuts that we've made, and we've talked about that. But the fact remains that even though we had to cut just about $17 million, we still have $350 million that, we're utilizing to educate the students within our community. And so some of the things that we're actually using those funds for would be the elementary curriculum and instruction textbook adoption, and even showing what the impact would be to that would be that there has not been an update done to those materials within years. And by getting these new materials, the new materials to teach the new mathematical standards and practices to help the student learn the intended content reflected in the Common Core state standards. Other things, and I know the question has been raised before, but what are we doing in terms of our empowerment zones? So we, do have some additional resources that we provided to the schools in empowerment zones, and so those are listed there and highlighted. And in terms of our secondary education and curriculum, there's an increase to support English language learners classrooms with resources for core curriculum. And so basically the impact for this is that students and teachers will have high quality resources available for their use and for all students. And so to highlight some others, there's going to be a couple new classes that are going to be rolled out within the college and career readiness pathways, principles of engineering, which is going to, we're looking at having those kids earn a dual credit from the University of Iowa. Education in child care careers, offering level 1 gateway certification, and then also orientation to health occupations. And then, of course, with the College and Career Readiness, we will continue to invest in the Academy Expos, the business site visits, college and university visits, so that these students within their selected career paths will be able to have their career aspirations and have a plan that they're going to formulate for what they can do during high school as well as after they graduate. In terms of some other budget highlights, special education services focused on increasing viable curriculum that's aligned with the Common Core standards in literacy and numeracy. They're going to explore alternative placements for students with disabilities that qualify for conditional probationary agreements. Early childhood, exciting, they actually have a new grant this year, the Early Childhood Preschool Expansion Grant, which will actually provide intensive and comprehensive services to children who are 4 years of age, and this is going to be a full-day program. And this is actually providing about $431,000 of relief to our Fund 10, because there will be positions that will be transferred, certified teaching positions, as well as para positions that will be transferred from Fund 10 and will be funded via this grant. And then in terms of the Title I and Title II funding, there was a real push this year to really try to use, within the budget process, formulate a plan and use the grant funding in accordance to helping to fund the programs that's actually needed, so to have more of a planned approach with the grants overall. And then I'm not going to read through all of these because they're actually in your information, but I'll just do a few highlights. Human resources, we're going to continue on with our HRIS system implementation to include the benefits module. For our operations and maintenance, deferred maintenance, there's items in the budget for that of about $3.5 million. And part of that $500,000 for bleacher replacements at Flynn and Risa, and then gym floor refinishing for Risa, Flynn, and Eisenhower. As I mentioned earlier, the $1 million to continue technology upgrades. The 5 diesel buses are in the budget, as well as a replacement of a service van in transportation. And so at the end of the day, with the operating funds budget that we're presenting, I just want to also let the board know and be reassured that this budget is in compliance in terms of fund balance requirements, where it is at 28% of the ratio that needs to happen in terms of reserves to expenses. And we've showed this slide to you previously, but in terms of how administration balanced the budget, you have this information here of the items that were deferred from this year's fiscal year 16 budget, some freezing of budgets or just straight cost reductions in non-salary and benefit line items, as well as FTE reductions. And just a brief overview, this is the capital funds, which includes a debt service, capital fund, and then the life safety funds. And with these funds, it's always important to note that we would have gotten revenue, or in this case, bond proceeds in the previous year, so in fiscal year 15 and 13, and then those are the dollars, of course, that we're continuing to spend down. And so for debt service, that fund is pretty much balanced, because for the debt service, you also receive a corresponding property tax levy for that. So we just get the same amount that we would need in order to pay the debt service. And then for capital, we're going to be spending down just about $49.9 million, and then we're going to be spending $2.965 million in life safety. And this is by no means the complete list of projects. These are some of the larger ones. There's a complete capital section that is actually the same reports that are shared at the Facilities Committee. And so these here are just some of the larger projects that either the capital team will be working on in terms of design, and then some of those that are scheduled to start design sometime in 2016. So we have additions at Hillman, Marsh, and Welsh, as well as MEP upgrades, Westview additions, Whitehead, Brookview, Carlson, and Flynn windows additions, as well as Flynn MEP, Gregory additions, Riverdale, and then Washington schools. So those are some of the larger projects, but not a complete list. So tonight, this is considered our first reading of the budget to the Board of Education. Tomorrow, we will be moving forward with a publication in the Rockford Register-Star notifying our community that our budget inspection period begins. So it will be online and it will be available for anybody who wants to review it. And on March 26th, as well as June 9th, we would like to have items on our agenda just in case the board wants to have further discussion or we need to have further follow-up or to answer any further questions that we can't answer here today. With the final presentation being on the 23rd, which that night we will do the public hearing as well as the second reading and then request that the board adopt the budget on June 23rd. That actually concludes my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Mr. Rollins. I didn't even have to get your light. I knew you were that prime.
You can read your mind.
I know you well.
All right.
Okay.
First question on back in one of the first slides, actually maybe the first slide, proposed budget all fund summary, debt service, Fund 30, we're budgeting $14.5 million for revenue and only $13.5 million for expenditures. And so we're budgeting a surplus for debt service of $982,000. And it looks like we forecasted a surplus of $208,000 actual in fiscal year 15. Why are we showing a surplus? Why are we doing a surplus in debt service?
I'm sorry, I have to.
First page, page 2. The page number is page 2.
The budget for fiscal year 16, it looks like the budget for fiscal year 16 and the actuals for 15, that is not the actual number. If you would go to, there's a slide, the first slide in the capital. It would be slide 15. And that number needs to be updated on that first chart there. But if you go to slide 15, and you'll see that the actual revenue that we're budgeting for is actually $13,546,000.
Well, do your numbers balance then? Do your numbers add up on the first slide?
The first slide, the revenue should be 13,546,000. It looks like it's carrying over.
Okay, so we are not going to budget a surplus for debt service?
Correct. Well, there'd be $4,909.
Okay. On the employee benefits expenditures, I guess one just general question I have, are you folding the TRS on behalf payments into employee benefits? Is that under line item 52?
The TRS on behalf, that's actually paid by the state.
Right.
That's actually in a separate line.
Okay.
That's going to be showed at the bottom. And for us to better be able to manage that and review that, we know that for ISB purposes, State Board of Education, that we have to show that and we have to have that approved. But that's actually on a separate, line item, and it's not
Okay,
in
and
those
that's fine. That's what I
slides.
wanted to make sure, is that it wasn't under employee benefits.
No.
But then I see we're budgeting a fairly large increase in employee benefits on page 5. And we had in fiscal year 14, actual 74.6 million. Looks like fiscal year 15, forecasted actual 72 million, 0.3. We're jumping that up by $5 million in 1 year, 5.9 million, it looks like, with an 8.1% increase. What's the basis for that?
The basis for that is the federal TRS on behalf rate. So in fiscal year 15, it was actually budgeted at 9%, and it should have been, and it actually came in at 33%. And so that actually is about $5 million increase for our certified staff. That increase from 9 to 36%, which is what it's going to be in fiscal year 16.
Okay, yep. Okay. Can you tell me how many vehicles that we own that are used by people in their jobs?
I don't have that information offhand, but we do have a list of that I can get that information back to you.
Do people take those vehicles home, or are they just fleet vehicles that they use during the day?
I believe that that's actually a combination.
There are a handful of individuals, probably less than 10, that actually take the vehicle home. We have around 60 to 70 vehicles that we use outside of our buses for distribution through our trades, through our delivery drivers, mail route, transportation, drivers from furniture deliveries throughout the district and things of goods and services.
I understand the trucks part of it. I'm really talking about more cars. So has anybody ever done an analysis of whether that makes financial sense, whether we'd be better off just paying mileage? Can we get that information? I'd kind of like to see what we're budgeting for fiscal year 16 for any purchases and for operation of cars that are actually being used by people.
Well, I'll just say that, yes, Ms. Hoadley and Mr. Schmidt and Ms. Talbert Scott can work together on that one to review it. We've certainly talked about it from a policy standpoint, but I would also like to do that analysis. And Ms. Lumpkin. Wouldn't want to leave you out either, sorry.
And I certainly hope we're following all the IRS regulations on reporting income to people who are using vehicles. Salaries, we've talked about the salaries of some of the people who are really devoted to the capital plan. Has there been any discussion by the administration about whether they want to move some of those salaries over to, or whether they will move any of those salaries over to the capital plan to free up some operating dollars?
We're looking at those and we're doing an analysis, a time study on those, because some of those individuals aren't solely on the capital plan. So what we're doing is we're looking at going back through everything that they've done this year and to kind of look at how they balance out, done either life safety work, capital work, or Fund 20 work, and then bring forward a recommendation to the superintendent.
Okay. And all of these discussions will take place within the context of the budget before we adopt it?
Yes.
Okay.
Find any money for buses yet?
Okay.
All right. I want to make sure I understand what the levy assumptions are for next year. So half of this budget is going to be based on next year's levy, which we haven't adopted yet. And, I think there was a little bit of confusion on our part about maybe what we approved for this year's levy. So conceptually, my understanding was that we approved a levy that would be flat, and that we did agree, I do remember this, we agreed that the administration could take any new revenue that would be generated by new property. So I was a little surprised to learn that we increased our levy by $1.7 million this year. And it's my understanding that $1 million of that was debt service, which I still don't entirely understand. I'm not entirely sure why our debt service would have gone up $1 million in 1 year. But maybe you can talk to that, I don't know. But then the other part of it is, and you touched on it with the Lowe's distribution center issue. So I understand that about $408,000 of that was because the enterprise zone ended, and so we were able to start taking more revenue from the Lowe's enterprise zone. I think we need to have a discussion as a board about what we want to do. One of the things that will bring our tax rate down is as we get new property into the district and we can start levying against that new property. If what we continue to keep saying is that you can keep the levy flat for existing property and then take anything new that you can get from new property, the rate's not going to go down, or at least it's not going to go down as fast as it would. So I'd like to know exactly what your assumptions are for next year for the levy. What are you doing? What are you assuming? What are you planning on doing?
So the assumptions that are baked into this for the 2015 levy would be a $7 million new construction increase in the EAV. And it would also include a 3% decrease in our current EAV. And when the district issues bonds, the levy is actually set at that time. So, meaning that it's set out 20 years. So we have to request that, from the county. But that information, when the board approves the bond resolution and all that information is filed with Winnebago and Boone County, that's actually setting that portion of the levy for the duration of the bond issue, payback.
So for some reason, our bond repayment schedule went up $1 million for the levy year 2014. But if I'm reading this correctly, it's going to go back down by about $1 million then for 15? It's going to go back down to like 13.5?
Yes.
So the new property increase, you're projecting about a $7 million increase in new property. What does that result in for our taxes?
I'll have to get all that detailed information back to you. The 7 million and the 3% go along with the assumptions that were provided by the financial advisor during the bond issue, Stifel. So those were the same assumptions that we used, but I can get you that information.
So we do the levy, I think, in November. When do we actually know what the new property number is going to be? Do you have any idea?
It normally comes about April of every year.
For the next levy year? So we do the levy in November, but we won't know what the new property is until April of 2016?
Correct.
Okay.
So when we do the levy and it's presented and approved by the board at that time, that's just estimates. So for example, the estimate that was used for the 2014 levy was a property tax EAV decrease of 5%. Well, it actually came in at 6.2%. So unfortunately, in addition to that, the county does provide estimates in the fall, about August, September timeframe. They will send out information as to what they're projecting the EAV decrease or what the EAV number is, as well as any new property.
But in terms of the assumption for the levy, just so I'm really clear on this, are you assuming that we will not take CPI for the 2016 levy?
You had it right, 2015
2015 levy, okay. 2015 levy. We will not take CPI. We'll keep the levy flat, but only for existing property. And if you get any new property, then you are going to take that as an additional levy.
Correct. And also, another piece of information that I actually requested from the county today too would be, I'd like to know when all of the TIFs and the enterprise zones are expiring, so that that's also coupled in with the tax levy development process. So if there are any TIFs or enterprise zones that will actually be adding to our tax rolls, that we're including that with our new property estimates.
That would all be good information to have, and I guess I'd repeat my comment that if we want to get the tax rate down, I mean, one of the things that'll help get the tax rate down is if we start adding in, if we keep the levy the same as we add in new property, and that will help get the rate down, but that's going to be a larger discussion, I think.
Ms. McCullough?
So the CPRT, you're reducing it by 5 million. Your expected,
We're reducing it by 2 million, but 3 million of it, just overall, 3 million of it is locked boxed for the capital plan.
because we voted on that on our $50 million. Right. We moved it to 50. I apologize. You said that there was an increase put in for certified because we had, and you referenced the fact that we do have negotiations coming forward, and so what is the assumption that we put in? Do we assume an increase? Maybe
Yes.
And what is the percentage?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's not the slide. That's not the slide. Yes, we do assume an increase. It's not on any slide.
We probably should not be
Okay.
discussing that
Yeah,
in
all
open.
right.
Yeah.
So we do, I thought I heard you say that. Okay, the federal TRS, just so everybody understands, because I keep having questions on that, that went from the 9 million to the 33, it's going to go to the 36. That's because of the Title I teachers, that we have to pay money back to the state, right? Or do we pay it to federal? I thought it went to the state. So I just think the rest of the board.
With Title I money, what happens, and I'm actually going to include in my weekly update a copy of a letter that I'm sending to the new state superintendent as well as the new state secretary of education to highlight an issue that I think is a really problematic issue for us, and that is that when we hire employees with federal money, certified employees, which is largely Title I, but it also is IDEA. When it's IDEA, we're able to use a lot of non-certified staff, which is not held to that 36% rate, that BEHAF rate that Ms. Talbert Scott was referring to. When you hire certified staff, which is what you need to hire if you're going to hire people with Title I, because Title I money goes to help literacy and numeracy, hence certified staff would be where you'd want to put that money. Anytime you hire a certified teacher, the state of Illinois takes 36% of that money, or at least plans to next year. This year they take only 33%. And so it really is an incentive to buy stuff. What we feel very strongly about is while there are supplies and materials that can be helpful for improving literacy, when you're talking about $14 million investment in Title I, what our children need and what low-income children need is more certified support. So we're advocating, as part of whatever state budget resolution comes about, that that's addressed. But in the meantime, we have to budget accordingly, that every time you hire a certified teacher, take whatever that total salary is and add 33% on top of that. That's what we pay. The total impact for the district was $1.6 million this year approximately, which would be about 29 additional FTEs we could add to support our most struggling students. It's a huge policy concern. We've made our local legislators aware. We've made statewide legislators aware. We're going to make sure the new Secretary of Education and the state superintendent are aware of our concern as well.
Thank you, Dr. Chair, because I had that question earlier today, and I just think it's good that everybody understands, because when you say federal TRS, it doesn't necessarily equate to me in my mind that it's the Title I money. So things like the math books the board approved, like the last board meeting, and tonight the RESA floor was approved, but none of all those things will be purchased after June 31st, is that correct?
Correct. We don't even have our fiscal year 16 open in the system for anybody to make any purchases as of yet. So yes, these are all going to be impacting our fiscal year 16 budget.
On our income transfer from the working cash fund, how come we, how is it determined that we're going to put 100,000 toward the ed fund and 400 towards O&M?
So what we will actually do is allocate based on the average cash balance in each fund. And then from there, that's where, so the 100,000 is above and beyond the normal allocation. I'm sorry, I'm probably not explaining that right. So let's say that there's 700,000 of interest. And each fund that has a cash balance, which means a positive fund balance. So for example, the O&M doesn't have a cash balance because it has a negative deficit. But the funds that do have that actually get their interest, and then from there, we make transfers between the funds so that we don't have a fund that has an extremely high fund balance. We want to have some equity in between all of the funds. So that also plays into for the O&M fund. So historically, there has been 400,000 to 500,000 transferred there to help subsidize that fund, and so that's pretty much where that dollar amount came from, to help subsidize those funds.
I guess I wonder why we just don't budget more in the fund in the first place so it doesn't come out under, or is it overspent?
It has to do, all the funds are essentially interchangeable for the most part. There are rules that govern fund balance transfers and what you can levy in each fund, but part of that has to do structurally with what we're allowed to levy for ed versus the ed fund, which is 10 and 17 versus 20. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Ms. Talbert Scott, but essentially, there's two things you look at. One is what you can levy per fund, but you have a great deal of flexibility until you achieve fund balance caps. And so that's what determines how we move. And so we do have some flexibility within the total picture to make fund transfers.
So to answer your question as to why we don't just just have it as like an interest income, because Fund 20, our O&M fund, has no interest income because there's no cash balance to have there. So that's why we would have to actually do a fund transfer to actually give that fund additional funding.
It appears that, it doesn't appear, our numbers on administration, I know that we're dropping off next year from 207 to 196, at least it says that from certified and non-certified administrators. But previous to that, it was running about 175. That big jump, I just, from the 175.8 to, say, the 207 that we had last year, what was the increase in administrators?
Combination of we added an assistant principal in every single building. At the middle and high school level, we added some additional support in that way. And we also added some additional special ed APs to make those caseloads more manageable. That is the majority of the jump. Dr. Hickman could speak in greater detail. He's covering a Rotary event for us this evening. But if you add up the special ed, investment in special ed APs coupled with middle school, high school assistant principals, it's all gone to the building.
So the drop of 32, and this is really more to my point, the drop down of 32 for next year, is that going to affect the staffing at the buildings, or where are we going to see that?
No, we did not address building level administration. Those were district office decisions.
Okay. And my understanding on the vehicles is that we have upwards of 80 vehicles in the district, and so some of those, they aren't all in operations and maintenance. Some are in HRs, with HR employees as well. In that, are there not? No, HR. Okay. So, oh no, IT. I apologize. It's IT and okay. So I think that would be interesting, and I've already asked for that information. I would hope that it's already being worked on. I know that I would like to piggyback onto Mr. Rollins' question about the employees, because as the task force, we talked about capturing all the costs of the capital plan within that $250 million. And if there are employees that we hired that we didn't have before, we hired for to bring that plan forward, that we do capture their not only their salaries, but their benefits. You said that you talked about the $7 million in new construction, but the percentage of that, are there any other things that you're planning that we will be capturing from the levy in the next year? I didn't expect, and I'm glad you asked that TIF question, an enterprise zone question, because I did hear that one brought to light at the operations committee, that there are some that are being retired, so we should be having additional revenue from that. So I think that's important information. Obviously, there's none in next year, or you won't know that, or you'll know that in time for when you bring us the next levy in November.
I don't know that now because I'm waiting for the county to give me that information. So whenever I get the information from the county, and if there are TIFs or enterprise zones that are scheduled to come off of our tax rolls in 2015, then we would have the opportunity to also include that within our levy. But that's not baked into the assumptions for the budget right now.
That was my question.
However, I emailed them today, so I'm really hoping that I get that information. And if I do get that information, that is something that, we can most definitely calculate and see what that could potentially bring if there's that opportunity there.
So not having enough information tonight to ask for changes, our understanding as a board is that we are to approve this budget to go out to the community for their input, and that we cannot make our suggestions, recommendation for changes until we come back. I mean, we don't have the information. We don't have you already printed everything. We don't have the information available to us for some of this, if we wanted to do the salaries and benefits, and if we wanted to do vehicles, or if we wanted to find any other resources.
We have the next two board meetings to make recommendations for any changes, because the budget would not be approved until the end of June.
So just to be clear and understand that, if we make recommendations, it's not like you make a motion, because we're not really voting on the budget. So we make recommendations, and then the administration chooses to follow those or not follow those. And if someone feels so moved, when we actually vote on the budget, then we have to make an amendment when we vote on it in the second meeting in June, correct?
Mrs. Powers, you had a question.
I do. So specifically within Fund 10, there are a number of line items that individually, not a big deal, but when you look at them collectively, and I for example, we've got close to $250,000 for overtime assistant principals budgeted for next year, whereas this year we had 0, and last year was $5,000. That's $250,000. But that's overtime, it says. So, so that kind of a question, as well as.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 46 of the booklet.
Oh, okay.
So in terms to respond to your question there was an inconsistency in terms of where items were budgeted. So they might not be budgeted in this line item. So for example, for differential pay, that shows $2.157 million for fiscal year 15 and only 1.3 in 16. Well, some of those were actually broken out. So
right, but when I look at all of the funds for that line item of overtime assistant principal, none of the other funds have dollars in them.
That must be substitute.
So I guess my question is, like that one, as well as Dean of Students, I didn't think we were adding deans, and without, we're going from $500,000 this year to $1.1 million next year. So do you want these line item questions? Because there's, again, individually they don't represent a lot, but there are some that when you add them up, I don't understand. What does temporary salaries mean? That's $2.1 million up from $61,000.
Okay, I can explain how all of that works. These are pools of money for whether it's substitutes in the schools, or temporary salaries, for people who go out on leaves and just different things like that. And so it's not really up from 61,000. It's just the way that it was budgeted in the previous year, whereas it was not budgeted in the actual object code that it should have been budgeted in. It was pooled into one object. So I think what would possibly be helpful is to just show where it would have been budgeted for in 15 and then where it is in 16. So that you can see overall that there's not really that big jump. It's just that we're trying to improve the accuracy of where we're actually budgeting for items at. And so the same thing with the Dean of Students. That object code of 51112, that's the description, but we would actually need to go back and look and see we're not adding any deans, but we're just really trying to align things up into the appropriate bucket.
Okay. Which makes it difficult.
Right.
For
comparison
very, very difficult to try to approve next year's budget without knowing what I'm going from and what I'm going to.
Good point.
So, because I get, as we talk about temporary salaries, if that is for substitute teachers, we substantially increased the pay for substitute teachers. And I'd like to kind of get an idea of, did we come in close to what we budgeted, because we increased the rate pretty significantly. So do you want me to just send that via email then? Okay.
Mr. Rollins, you had your...
I was just going to pile on here. This is my fifth one that I've looked at. You've done this to me every year. I've sort of quit asking these questions because the answer is always the same. We recategorized this year. And so it is pretty much impossible to compare year to year of these line items because every year something gets recategorized. So it would be really nice if you recategorize, if you could footnote it or do something so that we can follow it.
Most definitely. And I can, like I said, it would be real simple to give a chart showing where it was budgeted previously and where it's budgeted now, so that you can see big picture that there's not big increases.
Because, even on the one Mrs. Powers just mentioned, object code 51220 is substitute teachers, and this year it's 1.5 million, and next year the budget is 0. So clearly, instead of budgeting in substitute teachers, you must have moved it up to temporary salaries or something. I don't know what you did exactly, but, that's a variance in the opposite direction. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, and your team did a great job of putting this all together, and we have some time to work on it and make recommendations and get input from the community, and we'll be voting on the budget on June 23rd's board meeting, so.
Right. And as was mentioned before, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I try to get those turned around as soon as I can. I don't like to sit on that way,
Thank you.
giving you guys
Thank you for
that.
being so helpful.
Thank you.
Are there any other business items or agenda recommendations for this evening? If not, I'll take a motion to
I have a
adjourn.
question. Oh, never mind.
You wanna make a
So
mo-
moved.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We adjourned at 9:08 PM.